Texas, 1944. The sun had barely climbed over the horizon when the trucks rolled through the dust outside Lubbock. The engines coughed, sputtered, and died, leaving only the sound of cicadas and a low wind pushing through cedar trees. Inside one of the trucks sat a group of German prisoners, not soldiers but women. Their gray-green uniforms were creased, their eyes hollow from weeks of transport across oceans and borders. Among them, 23-year-old Greta Marie Hoffman, a former Wehrmacht Signal Corps radio operator captured near Normandy. She had imagined America as a cage of steel and fire. Every rumor from home had told her the same thing, that captured Germans would be beaten, humiliated, or made to dig their own graves under the desert sun. The truck doors creaked open. She braced for shouting, for the crack of a rifle, but instead came a calm voice, slow and strange in its rhythm. "Ma'am, watch your step." A man in a weathered brown hat stood waiting, his sleeves rolled up, dust on his boots. He wasn't a guard in a uniform. He looked like the man she had seen in Western films before the war, a cowboy. Behind him, the Texas skies stretched so wide it seemed unreal, blue to the edge of the earth. Greta Marie Hoffman blinked in confusion. The air smelled of horses and hay, not gunpowder. Around her, other women climbed down hesitantly, clutching their small bags. There were no chains, no shouting, just a few soldiers leaning on rifles, watching without malice. The cowboy handed her a metal cup of water. It was cold, cleaner than anything she'd tasted since Normandy. She drank it all at once. He nodded. Plenty more where that came from. She didn't know what to say. Back home, they had been told Americans were savages, a nation of criminals and factory slaves who live for money and machines. Yet here, standing in the soft heat of a Texas morning, she saw something that didn't fit the stories. Cattle moved lazily beyond the fences. Windmills turned in the distance. A dog barked, chasing shadows in the dust. The cowboy pointed toward the stables. "You folks will be helping out here, feeding, cleaning, riding if you're up for it." Riding. She almost laughed. She had expected shackles, not saddles. When the camp gates closed behind them, Greta Marie turned to look back at the open plains. For the first time since capture, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Curiosity. She whispered to herself, half in disbelief, half in wonder. This is America. The United States had something the Reich never truly understood: moral confidence. By 1944, America had become the world's largest warden of prisoners, holding over 400,000 captured Axis soldiers and civilians on its own soil. But instead of punishing them, the U.S. Army followed the Geneva Conventions with obsessive precision. Prisoners were paid small wages for labor, allowed to write letters, attend religious services, even learn English in camp schools. And in Texas, where land stretched farther than the eye could see, they were put to work on ranches and farms instead of behind barbed wire fences. The logic wasn't sentimental. It was practical. America had lost millions of young men to overseas service. Food still had to be grown. Cattle had to be tended. Cotton had to be harvested. German POWs filled the gap. But to Greta and her fellow captives, this practicality looked like something else entirely. Compassion. The first night, she sat on her bunk, staring at a plate of food she didn't think she deserved. Beef stew, bread, butter, even a slice of apple pie. She couldn't eat. She thought it was a test. Another woman whispered that the food was poisoned. But by the next morning, hunger defeated fear. They ate, and they realized something profound. The enemy they'd been taught to despise fed them better than their own army ever had. When they arrived at the Morrison Ranch, the shock only deepened. Instead of fences topped with barbed wire, there were open fields stretching to the horizon, dotted with herds of cattle and horses grazing under the vast sky. The first order of business, Jake announced, was not punishment, but breakfast. Bacon sizzling in iron skillets, biscuits, eggs, and coffee strong enough to jolt the soul. The women sat in stunned silence as they were served at a long wooden table. No guard stood behind them. No one shouted orders. After breakfast came another surprise. Jake led them to a corral where several horses waited, saddled and restless. "You'll be learning to ride," he said with a smile. "Can't herd cattle on foot, and y'all gonna help us drive them in next week." Laughter rippled nervously through the group. Greta whispered, "He's joking." But Jake wasn't. Within minutes, the ranch hands were pairing each woman with a horse, offering gentle instruction in broken German and pantomime. At first, it was chaos. Skirts tangled, saddles slipped, and shrieks echoed through the corral as one frightened mare bolted, dragging its rider in circles. The cowboys laughed, not cruelly, but warmly, helping each woman back into the saddle. "Don't fight her," one drawled. "Just feel the rhythm. She'll carry you if you trust her." By noon, the women were covered in dust and sweat, but they were laughing. The fear that had gripped them for months began to melt under the Texas sun. For the first time since capture, they were outside the wire without guards at their backs. When Greta finally learned to guide her horse at a gentle trot, she felt something she hadn't known since the war began. Freedom, not the political kind, but a personal one. A feeling of motion, wind, and possibility. That night, back in the bunkhouse built for workers, she wrote in her journal, "They trust us. It is madness, but also perhaps kindness disguised as madness. They treat us not as enemies, but as people." Her confusion was shared by everyone in the group. They had grown up in a society that measured strength in domination and obedience. Here, strength looked like calm confidence, patience, and good humor. Even the cowboys' authority felt different. They commanded through example, not shouting. When a horse refused to move, they didn't whip it. They waited, spoke softly, and tried again. It was leadership built on respect, not fear. Greta watched this with quiet astonishment. If this was the nation they had fought against, then everything she had been taught about America was a lie. Evenings brought another culture shock. Instead of being locked away, the women were invited to sit by the fire, where harmonicas and guitars turned the Texas dusk into something that felt almost sacred. At first, they sat apart, weary and uncertain, but the sound of the music worked on them slowly, breaking down the invisible wall between victors and vanquished. One night, when a cowboy began to hum Lily Marlene, the song that every German soldier knew by heart, Greta found herself singing along before she realized it. The fire crackled, voices blended, English and German, harmony and melody, until for a few fleeting minutes there were no enemies, only people bound by the same tune under the same stars. Afterward, Jake leaned back on his saddle and said softly, "War ends sooner when folks realize they were never that different." The next morning, the work resumed, but everything felt lighter. The barriers of fear and suspicion were fading fast. One of the women, Anna, asked if she could learn to use a lasso. The cowboys obliged, teaching her with patience and good humor. Before long, the sight of a German POW twirling a rope over her head drew laughter from both sides. But what truly cemented the change came one afternoon when a storm rolled in fast from the west. The sky turned black, the wind howled, and lightning split the horizon. The cattle panicked, scattering across the fields. Without hesitation, the women ran to help. They mounted horses, shouted, waved, and rode alongside the cowboys through sheets of rain and mud, helping drive terrified cattle back toward the pens. Hours later, drenched and shivering, they returned together, victorious. Not one animal lost. Jake walked among them, his face streaked with rain and pride. "Guess y'all ain't just city girls after all," he said with a grin. That night, the ranch hands quietly hung a hand-painted sign over the bunkhouse door. "The German Cowgirls." Greta looked at it in disbelief, then laughed until tears came. Somewhere deep inside, a shift had occurred. The war, the propaganda, the fear. It all seemed far away. What mattered now was survival, work, and the strange dignity of being trusted. In a world at war, that trust was rarer than gold. By early autumn, the air on the Texas plains began to cool, and so too did the walls around the German women's hearts. The war still raged across Europe, but here time seemed to move differently. The days were filled with honest work, and the nights with quiet laughter and the hum of crickets. For the first time since capture, mail was allowed. Each woman received a single sheet of official camp stationery and was told she could write one letter home. The pages would be censored, of course, but even within limits, it was a rare chance to speak to the world they'd left behind. That night, the bunkhouse was silent, except for the scratch of pencils on paper. Greta's hand trembled as she began. "Dearest mother, I am alive, and I must tell you something you will not believe. I am working on a farm in Texas. They call it a ranch. The people here are kind. Yes, truly kind. They give us food. So much food, I can hardly eat it all. They even let us ride horses." She paused, staring at the words. Would her mother think she had gone mad? The propaganda in Germany had painted American POW camps as brutal, inhumane places where prisoners were starved and beaten. But here in this sunburned paradise, she was drinking coffee every morning and learning to make chili. She continued, "Mama, they trust us. We could run, but we do not, because we are free in all the ways that matter. I never thought freedom could look like this." The letters were collected the next morning. Weeks later, replies came, carefully censored and trembling with disbelief. "Greta, are you sure? You must be mistaken. Perhaps you were dreaming. They would never treat prisoners so well." Her mother wasn't the only one who doubted. Other women received similar replies. Their families refused to believe tales of hamburgers, open fields, and friendly cowboys. To those still enduring bombing raids and ration cards back home, such a life sounded like fantasy. Even the American officers who reviewed the letters seemed faintly amused. "Y'all are writing fairy tales," one chuckled. "Ain't nobody going to believe you over there." But the reality was undeniable. Each day, the German POWs rode deeper into a version of America that defied everything they'd been taught. They saw it in the abundance. Eggs by the dozen, meat by the pound, sugar by the sack. They saw it in the machines, tractors roaring across fields powered by gasoline that seemed endless. They saw it in the attitude. No hierarchy, no bowing, no fear. When Greta asked one cowboy why he treated them so kindly, he shrugged. "Lady, war's over for you when you get here. Ain't no use fighting ghosts." May 1945. The wind across the plains carried the scent of spring grass and rain. Calves had been born. Fields were greening again, and rumors were swirling faster than the dust devils that chased each other across the pastures. Germany was collapsing. Berlin surrounded. Hitler dead. Some said, others whispered that it was propaganda. At the Morrison Ranch, the German women worked as usual. They mended saddles, washed clothes, and herded cattle. But the tension in the air was unmistakable. The radio in Jake's kitchen, usually reserved for country music and baseball, now carried nothing but news from Europe. That afternoon, when Jake came out to the barn, his face was solemn. He held his hat in one hand, the other gripping a folded newspaper. "Ladies," he said quietly, "it's over." For a moment, no one spoke. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap that hadn't yet broken. "What do you mean?" Greta asked in a whisper. "The war," Jake said. Germany surrendered. Some women froze. Others dropped the tools they were holding. Anna covered her mouth and began to cry softly. Greta just stared at the ground, her mind blank. For years, everything, every breath, every fear, every loss had been tied to the war. Now suddenly it was gone. No one cheered. There was no celebration, only stunned silence and the distant lowing of cattle. The women gathered that night by the fire, their faces lit by flickering orange light, unsure whether to feel relief or grief. Jake poured coffee for everyone and said quietly, "It's done now. You all can go home soon." The word home hit harder than any news of surrender. What did that even mean anymore? Their towns might be gone, their families displaced or dead. Germany was rubble. Greta sipped her coffee and watched the sparks drift up into the night. "What'll we go back to?" she murmured. Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone knew there was no easy answer to that question. In the days that followed, the U.S. Army sent officers to process the prisoners for repatriation. Trucks arrived to transport them back to official camps where they would await ships bound for Europe. The cowboys stood quietly by as the women packed their few belongings, mostly clothes, letters, and small keepsakes. Jake approached Greta as she was folding her work gloves into a small canvas bag. "Reckon you'll be going home soon," he said softly. She nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison, for everything." He smiled, eyes squinting under the brim of his hat. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. You all worked hard, earned your keep. That's all any of us can do." Then, with a playful grin, he reached behind him and held out something wrapped in brown paper. "Got something for you." Inside was a brand new Resistal hat, cream-colored, soft as suede. "So you don't forget Texas," he said. Greta laughed through tears. She put it on awkwardly, the brim shading her eyes. The ranch hands hooped and clapped, and someone shouted, "Yeehaw!" The German cowgirl rides again. When the trucks finally rolled out, the women looked back through the wooden slats and saw the ranch fading into the distance. For Greta, that sight would never fade. It wasn't just a place. It was a revelation. She had come to Texas a prisoner and was leaving as something else. Someone who had glimpsed a different way of living, where dignity came not from rank or fear, but from simple respect.